Hello everybody, I'm Lieutenant General Mike Ferreter, President and CEO of the National Veterans Memorial and Museum. You know, we strive every day to bring the stories of our nation's veterans to life through personal stories, letters and artifacts and programming, and more. Today I'm proud to present our first virtual exhibition, We the People, Portraits of Veterans in America. It came to the museum this fall, and now it's coming to you. Our good friend, Mary White, shares our mission to honor, connect, inspire, and educate our nation about the selfless service and sacrifice of our veterans. Over a period of 7 years, Mary created a portrait of a veteran from every state. I'm excited for you to see it and feel it and connect with these portraits the same way I did. Well, if you're watching this, I'm guessing that you can't come in person. Until then, enjoy this tour of Mary White's Portraits of Veterans in America. Hope to see you soon.
In many communities across America, there are men and women who go about their days with quiet resolve and little expectation of accolades or recognition. They are the folks whose days are marked by the cows milked, the patients seen, corn harvested, the test papers scored, engines rebuilt, and children fed and put to bed. They generally go about their lot with steady purpose and without complaint, neither cutting corners nor cutting out early. They are perplexed by those seeking attention in a media-obsessed world and are sustained simply by knowing that theirs was a job done well and done with honor. When asked why they took the path they did, some answer because their fathers chose this way. Some say it was because they had no other options. And others say it was because they wanted to make a difference in a challenging world. Regardless, whether by purpose or by accident, almost everyone I spoke to, including those I painted for the We the People project, told me that serving in the military ultimately changed them and made them a better person. Although I could not have known it in the beginning, what I experienced over the 7 years I spent traveling the country and painting veterans would change my own life in unimagined ways too. There were personal setbacks, financial concerns, and many promising plans that imploded. Paintings that took weeks to complete ended up being purposefully destroyed and then started anew. Ideas that had been sketched out and taped to the wall of my studio were tossed and replaced with others that reached deeper. The seemingly endless uncertainties, dead-end leads, and unreturned phone calls finally began to come together, unleashing a cascade of newer ideas and energy. Traveling by myself to distant and unknown regions of the country may have seemed ill-advised to others, but for me it became a wonder-filled expedition to the uncharted. I never knew in advance, one day to the next, where I would end up in each of the 50 states, or how I would get to my ultimate destination. And I certainly could never have imagined that, in addition to cars and airplanes, my means of transportation would also include a ferry boat, a lobster boat, 18-wheeler, harbor patrol boat, cruise ship, taxi cab, fire truck, motorcycle, 3-wheeler, helicopter, pickup truck, flatbed truck, plumbing truck, and a very, very slow golf cart. We the People was the most unplanned, the most haphazard, and the most exhilarating adventure of my life. My original idea was to paint an all-encompassing portrait of America, showing its diversity. Not how we wish America to be, but how it really is. The plan was to select and paint one person from each of the 50 states. And the dilemma soon became, how do you choose? And what makes a person most American? And here's what it all came down to. I believe that what makes a person truly American is anyone willing to sacrifice their life for our country. It was a project that would take over 7 years to do just the paintings. Most of the time, I traveled by myself, doing almost the entire project in secret. I made a list of the different kinds of Americans I wanted to include in the series. I found a rancher in New Mexico, now in his mid-90s and still ranching. In the mornings, I rode out with the rancher and his dog to feed the herds in what was that eye-watering, biting cold. And while out there, the sky turned a beautiful violet color with small snowflakes whipped up in the wind. I remembered that back in the studio, and to get the effect of flurries, I dipped my fingers in the water bucket and flicked water droplets onto the paper. I wanted to be sure that I included women. It seemed only natural that I would include a boxing trainer and a policewoman. This is Renee from Connecticut. She's an officer pretty much in the area where she grew up as a child. So the painting is really about, the past and the future. I've depicted Renee standing there, fully fit and at the ready. Walking just past her is a young girl that could have been Renee as a young child, or certainly a current child, maybe hoping of doing something equally as great in the future. I knew that if I was going to paint an all-encompassing portrait of America, I had to paint everybody from the top down, meaning I knew that I would have to include an astronaut and everyone in between. For the astronaut, I was so fortunate I was able to get into NASA, where I met Winston, who was a former Navy pilot and did 3 spacewalks. This is the largest painting in the exhibition. It's almost 10 feet long. It's a triptych. And I wanted to get the feeling of Winston coming back from a spacewalk to the spaceship. I knew also that I'd have to include the Americans at the other end. I found Dennis through an organization in California that helps homeless vets transition back into society. At that time, Dennis lived under a tarp in the forest near Pebble Beach. Dennis told me that his Army uniform was the only suit he ever owned, and that serving in the military was the one only important thing he ever did. Other veterans that I painted that had marvelous stories. One was Hiroshi, a Japanese American living in Hawaii, and served during World War II right after Pearl Harbor was bombed. He tried to enlist immediately, but was turned away because of his heritage. It wasn't until a year later that he was allowed to join the United States Army as a warrant officer. And the next day, after I met Hiroshi, I was driving along the coast and I spotted a massive tree trunk that had washed up along the shoreline. And I thought about that remnant of a tree a lot. It was a lot like Hiroshi to me, that it had come from a distant shore and landed on ours. You see that I felt that the real portrait of Hiroshi wasn't him sitting there on the tree, but it was that one wave in the far distant, that one person coming from a far-off land to defend our country and the freedoms that we enjoy. When I met with each of the veterans, I asked each of them what was the best part of being in the military and what was the worst part. For the best part, most of them said it was the camaraderie, that they got to travel the world and that the military taught them maturity and responsibility. The worst part for many of them was, of course, being away from home and, of course, combat. But even in the worst of situations, they were trained to stay strong and to keep going and to never ever let fear stop them. The veteran in the painting called Truce told me that he served during the worst of Vietnam. And when he went into battle, he carried a Polaroid camera with him. When I asked him, how were you able to have the presence in the situations to take those photographs? And his answer was, because I knew that that moment was part of my life too. One of the youngest veterans that I painted was Casey, who's a firefighter from Oregon. I asked him, Casey, what's it like after you fight a fire? Aren't you guys tired and covered with soot and smoke, and aren't you all sweaty? And he said, yes, we are, because something's always lost in a fire, and that's what I wanted to show. And what I didn't know was that he was redeployed back to Afghanistan and saw the very worst of what mankind can do. Nowadays, Casey has finally been able to go back to work, and he always has with him his dog. He named his dog after his best friend that he lost in battle. Others carry scars that most of them you can't see, but some you can. One of them is Ed from North Carolina in the painting called Archangel. Ed is an athlete, and I wanted to show him riding his bicycle. He served 12 years in the Marines. After 9/11, he re-upped and joined the Army for another 5 years until he lost his leg from a missile-launched grenade. As he says, I had 17 great years in the military and one really bad day. Another World War II veteran that I painted is in the painting called Glory. This is Amelia from Savannah, Georgia. When I went to visit her, I sat at her feet and sketched her as she told me stories. And at one point, she actually put her hand over her heart and said the Pledge of Allegiance to me. That took my breath away, and that's what I wanted to capture. Another veteran that I painted, one of the oldest ones, was the veteran in the painting that I called Tomato Pie. Originally, I thought I would paint Hank puttering around in his backyard in his vegetable garden. But then I realized, no, I wanted to come up really close and paint his face with the sun dappling through his beat-up straw hat. One of the ideas I had for the paintings was I wanted to include a taxi driver. And so I thought, what better place to go than to New York City and paint a taxi driver there. I went to New York and I called several of the taxi companies, and I was able to find John. John picked me up in the taxi at the hotel and drove me around New York. It was what a great tour I had. And he said along the way, he said, "Mary, what do you want? What do you want in the background of this painting?" I said, "Well, I want to show New York. I want to show a lot of people, a lot of different kinds of people going in different directions of different means, walking, bicycle, cabs, cars, pushing strollers." And so we drove around, and finally I said, "John, that's it, and he stopped, and I got out, and the only place I could really get the good photos was pretty much in the middle of the street. So John jumps out too, and is sort of flagging down traffic to veer around me while I was getting the photos that I needed. And then later I had him sort of pull up alongside, along the curb, and park there with his coffee, with his arm up on the window, drinking his cup of coffee and letting all the people walk by. So it was, again, another great adventure with an extraordinary veteran. Perhaps the painting that took me the longest to do was the painting called America. And this is Kella from Aberdeen, South Dakota, who is a Lakota Indian and does traditional dance. I went to her hometown, and she put on her regalia with this beautiful hand-beaded regalia. Much of it was made by her husband, and I loved it because if you look along the sleeve, you see American eagles and the American flag. I love the long fringe, the way it would just kind of gently move in the breeze, or when she moved her arms. She was so pure in this that I wanted to contrast her against something totally opposite. The painting is called America because I wanted to show the best and the worst of America. So I positioned Kella in an alley with some graffiti, with trash strewn around her, and then had her with her arms, open out wide, and with this hopeful gaze upward. It took me the longest because of the detail in it. The beads, every little bead had to be painted, dark, middle tone light, and the light is actually the white of the paper, painting around that. So it took me a long time, but it certainly was one of the greatest pleasures. This is Sandra, who is in the painting called Long Haul. She was a Marine, and has been a career truck driver, hauling behind her a 50-foot rig cross-country her entire career. Her companions were two small dogs. You can see one of them in the window over her. One of the questions I get frequently is, "Mary, what's your favorite painting?" And of course, that's very hard to answer. As an artist, I have certain favorites because they were depicting situations, a kind of lighting that I'd never experienced before, such as the coal miner from West Virginia, experiencing that kind of light, or a situation like the lobsterman from Rhode Island, who described in detail to me what it was like to have a rogue wave come up over the boat when they were hauling in traps. Others became favorites to me, such as Jody from Maine, who was a Marine patrol officer patrolling over 200 miles of Maine coastland and the waters surrounding it. The veterans, I would say, taught me a lot. I'm not a veteran. So for me, it was something very new to be able to travel to all these 50 states and to meet so many different kinds of veterans. And they taught me something, some things that I take with me. I think that perhaps one of the things they taught me was to never, ever let fear stop you. I think the other thing that the veterans taught me was that this is an amazingly beautiful country filled with some amazing and extraordinary people, that the great diversity of these veterans represent all of us. And of course, I had no idea when I'm on painting number 1 and 2 and 3, what I was going to end up with, the veterans that I would meet, and maybe more importantly, what their reaction would be and what the public's reaction would be. We knew that as I was coming to a close on this project, some of the veterans would not be able to come to the opening exhibition and to see their paintings. So we took some of the paintings to a few of the veterans in advance to get their reaction, to see what their thoughts were. And it was always very moving. They said that they felt an enormous honor to be included in this project. But what I know is that for the public coming into this, I know that most everybody viewing these paintings, they're not going to recognize the people in the paintings. They'll probably never meet them. But my hope is that they will recognize the emotion. And what I would like is for every veteran that comes and sees this exhibition that could look at these paintings and point to 1 or 2 and say, yes, that's me, and that I mattered. So the reaction was really probably the biggest surprise to me and the biggest gift. That when the show went up and I was able to talk to the veterans that were in the paintings and hear their response to it, but also hear the response of other veterans who came from around the country to see these paintings and to tell me how much they were moved at seeing their stories told, but in a different way. There were times that I was so moved, I had to walk away. And so I think, they said that it was a gift to them, but I think that I was the one that received the greater gift.